technology is a means to an end. As a lecturer, you determine the outcomes for your course and you work backwards from there. So the technology has a place in your course design, but you need to think very carefully about what the role of the technology is in your teaching and how it helps your learners achieve the outcomes that you have in mind for that particular course.
In terms of learning goals, it allows us to double check that we're in the right location.
250.
There's been a lot of research done that navigation seems to be a bit of a dying art. So as a geologist, you need to be really good at navigation. We're often in very remote areas. So it's giving us a way of actually having a GPS as well as them doing it by the traditional means of triangulation and looking at features, so navigating by features. So we're trying to teach the students how to do navigation by hand. But you can get quite out with that. We often find, particularly in areas where there's not a lot of key features in the landscape, they're often quite inaccurate in terms of locating themselves, and they need to be quite precise when they're trying to map an area because they want to try and get these boundaries between different rock types, as accurate as possible. So having the ability to then call on the GPS to double check and give it another way of sort of checking where they're in the right place is also really helpful.
In this particular project, where we used BYOD in the field, the main reasoning behind that was if we take the students out to a field site, most of them are going to bring their devices anyway. And since they are already quite familiar with their own devices and how to operate that, if we ask them to download a particular app or a particular piece of software that works well with their device, then we can use the familiarity that they have with their own technology to help them speed up the learning process.
However, that being said, there are studies that show when they're taking in a whole bunch of extra knowledge, say in field geologic mapping, and they have to navigate a new tool, that leads to cognitive overload, and they just tune out both. So it becomes important then to have them do some sort of training ahead of time, so they just have some familiarity with how to navigate using the app, how to collect points, how to sync them up to the web, and how to, say, change to different base maps if they want to do that.
If there's a technology problem that obviously hinders the learning experience that the students will have simply because they can't access the technology in a way that helps them in their learning, it simply doesn't work. One of the things that was done in this particular project is that there were always a number of spare devices that the university owned to bring to the field site so that if there was a technology problem, that there were backups available that had been tested before.
You want it to be easy. We tried doing more complicated things, taking notes. We pre-programmed in for the field trip suggestions of things that students could think about when they're at the location, but they said they didn't really use it. So yeah, it came back to the GPS and the attaching photos.